there's people who use Twitter Spaces, and then they're over on that stage and they're listening in and they're talking, and you'll hear some of them. And then we have our regular OG folks over here in Clubhouse, and we're all grooving in here as we always do. And good to see everybody's back, and Suzanne's got her hand up, and Jeff's got her hand up. And if you want to jump on stage, the format of the room is very simple. Everybody's welcome to jump on stage and grab the mic and share their insights, whatever it is. We're going to go through the top headlines of tech news for the next 2 hours at least, because it's never taken less than that. And sometimes we actually had a 7-hour session one time. So it'll go somewhere between 2 and 7 hours, probably just over 2 hours. And the first story, should we jump right into it? Is anyone other than Alex with the important headline that AWS had a major outage, which explains why the room was kind of peculiar with how it was behaving when we were opening. I think we can go ahead and get started as soon as we get the official air horn going, and there it is. So the first story is from the Wall Street Journal. Cheryl?
The green bean in Clubhouse.
Okay, you can DM me or something like that. So here we go. There you go, Cheryl. And now the first story, if you're ready. I'm ready. It is from the Wall Street Journal that Microsoft and cybersecurity company called Mandiant say that hacking groups linked to China, Iran, North Korea, and Turkey are exploiting the Log4j flaw, which we've covered the past few days. And in fact, it's been the top story the past few days, as it probably should be, because it's a pretty BFD, as they say, a big effing deal. And it's because this Java class is used by everybody, is using this in their Apache servers. And so everyone's doing updates. Minecraft rolled out their update. That was one of, I mean, honestly, it's a huge percentage of the web is potentially vulnerable. In a 0-day, meaning you know people won't know that they're being exploited. And we had some rather respectable cybersecurity folks join us the past few days to tell us in detail what this is about. And they said currently, you know, the cybersecurity folks are trying to patch things up as quickly as possible. And all, you know, anyone who has cybersecurity skills is being flooded with help requests around the clock. And, you know, they're all trying to patch things up as fast as they can before bad actors try and jump in. And so this headline from the Wall Street Journal basically is highlighting what we knew would happen eventually, is the bad actors are going to start jumping in and trying to take advantage of this opportunity of all of this major vulnerability throughout the web. So the headline says, hackers backed by China seen exploiting security flaw in internet software. Researchers call it one of the most dire cybersecurity threats to emerge in years and could enable devastating attacks. And we do not pick the order of these headlines, by the way. These are kind of ranked in the most part by what is most popular, what is getting the most coverage and the most buzz on Twitter in terms of tech headlines. And this, again, for 3 days in a row, happens to be the top one. This just happens to be the most recent evolution of this drama that now the hackers are jumping in. So the article starts by saying that hackers linked to China and other governments are among a growing assortment of cyber attackers seeking to exploit a widespread and severe vulnerability in computer server software, according to cybersecurity firms and Microsoft. The involvement of hackers whom analysts have linked to nation states underscores the increasing gravity of the flaw of the Log4j software, a free bit of code that logs activity in computer networks and applications. Cybersecurity researchers say it's one of the most dire cybersecurity threats to emerge in years and could enable devastating attacks, including ransomware, in both the immediate and distant future. Government-sponsored hackers are often among the best resourced and most capable, analysts say. Quote, the effect of this vulnerability will reverberate for months to come, maybe even years, as we try to close these doors and try to hunt down all the actors who made their way in, says John Heldquist, Vice President of Intelligence Analysis at the US-based cybersecurity firm Mandiant. Both Microsoft and Mandiant said they have observed hacking groups linked to China and Iran launching attacks that exploit the flaw in Log4j. In an update to its website posted late Wednesday, Microsoft said it had also seen nation-backed hackers from North Korea and Turkey using the attack. Some attackers appear to be experimenting with the attack. Others are trying to use it to break into online targets, Microsoft said. One of the groups exploiting the security hole in Log4j is the same China-backed group that was linked to the widespread attack on Microsoft Exchange servers earlier this year, Microsoft said. In July, Biden blamed China for the Microsoft Exchange attack and said it had high-confidence hackers tied to the Ministry of State Security were behind it. Dozens of other security countries also blamed Beijing, which had denied involvement in the hacking. A spokesperson at the Chinese embassy in Washington didn't immediately respond to requests for the comment early Wednesday. End of article. So that's the latest update. There's a couple of sister kind of related articles. One that the CISA orders U.S. federal civilian agencies to patch systems affected by the Log4j vulnerability by December 24th. That would be the U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. And so they're telling all federal civilian agencies to patch systems affected by Christmas Eve, which makes sense. And then Clinton's got his hand up over here. Let's see what Clinton wants to say. And another sister article, although very similar, the CISA director, Jen Easterly, says that the Log4j flaw likely affects hundreds of millions of devices and may be the most serious bug she has seen in her career. To give you
Tyler, the security teams are going crazy over this thing. It is hugely prevalent, and it's basically in everything. And so I'll be surprised if someone can, if any can patch this by the Christmas Eve. I mean, this is a huge issue. Companies are facing. All the security companies are going crazy.
Yes. Anyone else?
So I'm not sure of the details, but yesterday I was in Alexandra's room, and it seems like people were being hacked on the stage, and somebody, I forget who, said that that's to do with that same vulnerability being part of iOS, and there was an iOS 15 update that fixed it. So we all left the room and updated.
Okay.
Is that are you talking about people getting kicked out of the room on Clubhouse here?
No, it was more severe than that.
Well,
Because
I'm getting the impression there was a bit of I mean, everything's gravy right now, and so kudos to the Clubhouse team. I imagine they were hustling in the background because that's not fun when stuff isn't working when you're on a social media platform. But that stuff happens in the early years of social media companies. Everyone who was in the first few years of Twitter will fondly remember the fail whale, which that was an incredibly common sight in the early days of Twitter. And kudos to it. It seems like they seem to be working fine for now. So I applaud the Twitter. Oh, we got Tom Ryan in the audience, who's a cybersecurity.
Oh yeah, bring Tom up.
And Tom can probably give us an update. And Shira's back, everybody. Welcome back, Shira. And let's see if Tom...
And Tyler,
Yes?
I think Clinton from the Twitter space has been waiting.
Okay, Clinton. You got your hand up.
Yeah.
What's going on?
Hey, Tyler. First of all, I want to thank you for starting with that particular story.
Yep.
And I'm by no means a computer expert or a software hack expert or anything like that. But what I will point out is that there seems to be a growing trend throughout North America.
Mm-hmm.
When I say North America, I do mean Canada as well.
Mm-hmm.
That whenever there is some sort of a economic trade dispute with Beijing, that shortly after whatever the trade dispute is that's in question, there seems to be a series of these software hacks and things like that. And what I consider more worrisome is that usually before the software hacks happen, like this story that you've described, usually about a week before, there's a warning from an ambassador, that's connected to Beijing in whichever country we're talking about, or a consulate office.
Yeah, the CCP doesn't want you revealing this, apparently.
You know,
Yeah.
yeah, then these hacks happen.
You still there? Your signal's a little weird.
I'm not sure what happened. Maybe because we're talking about Beijing
That's what
right
I
now. I'm not
said.
sure.
Yeah.
But that's the
No,
joke, of
Clubhouse
course.
is having major glitches today.
But
People are getting kicked off.
so my point is that whenever one of these stories breaks, there's some sort of a warning from an ambassador or from one of the mainland newspapers out of Beijing, and then suddenly there's an online attack, and so that is worrisome because if it is in fact linked, then I think that just leads to further problems when it comes to the global community at large and Beijing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is the weird thing is, no one has ever really lived through a cyber war before. And so no one can really, very few people can accurately predict how it will go down because no one's ever really been through one. But as everything becomes digitized, and every day something new becomes digitized, and our water, food, and energy systems are all digitized. Everything we do is digitized, and that means we could have a really peculiar thing on our hands. And this whole log4j flaw is particularly concerning because so many people can get into systems now, kind of through the back doors without anyone really knowing, and it's going to take a very long time to smoke them out. Very, very, very long time. Because
Hey, Tyler, ask Tom. Tom, do you want to speak to this stuff since you're like shit deep in it?
Sure. I mean, this is kind of the reason why I open up a room specifically tonight for this. So essentially, what's happening is this is growing because one of the bigger problems, we spoke about this over the weekend, Tyler,
Yeah.
and people started to remediate it and stuff like that. The problem is the version they told them to remediate is not. There's still flaws in it. So now they're going through the whole cycle all over again. This started yesterday afternoon. So they told them to upgrade to Log4j 2.1.5. Now it's 2.1.6. So I kind of compare this to having COVID because you're guaranteed to lose 14 pounds because you don't even have time to eat or sleep on this topic. And we're constantly going back and forth as to what the proper fix is. And everyone's focusing on this one little piece. It's a whole pyramid of things. So for instance, Red Hat Linux is on there. Okay, so you have a core operating system. Then you have Apache Tomcat, which is the web server. Then you have your particular applications. Then you have the things that are supposed to protect your applications. So it's like rebuilding everything the company has all over again. That's why it makes this so critical. And two other things that have also popped up that you probably haven't read yet is they found a worm associated with this to exploit stuff internally now. So most people were focusing on external, now internal. And that starts off with a phishing. All right, you click on a link and now it can compromise those devices internally. And then there's also talks about certain ransomware gangs already using this. So it's growing by the hour.
Fun. And then what you have your room in your bio, perhaps? You have a room
Yes.
about this.
Yeah, I have two different rooms today. One is going to have somebody who works at
Hello?
3 p.m. today. Well, she'll be focusing in the military aspect. She came from cyber warfare for the Army. That's at 3 p.m. Eastern, and then at 6 p.m. Eastern is specifically just Log4j.
Cool. Very cool that you're hosting those conversations for those who want to dive deeper. That's cool. Very cool. Okay, so anyone else with a thought on this, the big story of the day? We'll go on to story number 2. You ready, Cheryl? Story number 2 from CNBC. About a leaked memo from Google. And Google tells employees that they must comply with vaccine policies by January 18 or lose pay and eventually be fired, is the headline. And the question is that true, or is that accurate? Is that an accurate assessment of what's going on? We don't know, because these journalists are so thirsty for your click that they're willing to lie to your face. So you actually have to read and hopefully find the source of this memo and read the memo to find out what's really going on, or find a news outlet that isn't paid by advertising, like the BBC. And so let's read the BBC article version of this, because they're not terribly thirsty. It says, Google will fire employees who refuse vaccination, report says. Okay. Google has repeatedly told employees that those who fail to comply with the company vaccine policies will ultimately lose their jobs. Ouch. Ouch. An internal memo obtained by CNBC told staff that they must upload documents proving vaccination status. Those who do not would be placed on unpaid leave and later sacked, it said. Google has been pushing for an eventual return to the office, which has been repeatedly delayed, and expects those attending buildings to be vaccinated. Okay, now that's where it gets interesting, because Google has a lot of people who don't go to the office. And that was what was going on in my mind, is like, are you going to force people to get vaccinated who aren't going to the office? It appears not. Well, could that mean perhaps that if you aren't vaccinated, that you could work from home instead of going to the office? You say, hey, boss, you know what? We're not forced. We don't have to go to the office right now. There's no, mandate in place saying that we have to go to the office. Can I work from home? I can understand, them forcing people to get vaccines going to the office. I don't see how they could force people getting vaccines who are staying at home and firing them if they're not. So this is where
They are.
Tyler, the
They
difference
are.
is going to be they're going to be bringing people back to the office when they do. I mean, I think they've gotten pushed again. Their dates are pushed back, but certain of their jobs do require coming back to the office. So as you're delving in deeper, if they continue to work from home, that makes sense. But
right.
a lot of the functions are going to be brought, or
Yeah.
some people are going to be brought back.
Here's
So
the
Accenture already gave a mandate that either you were vaccinated or proved a legitimate reason why you couldn't be vaccinated, or you lost your job in the middle of November. This is nothing new, guys.
So the spokesperson for Google says, here's the quote. Quote, as we stated before, our vaccination requirements are one of the most important ways we can keep our workforce safe and keep our services running. Does that then mean that people who work individually in their own home office must be vaccinated?
Well, I just want to jump in there.
Yeah.
I mean, it depends. I would argue it depends on what it is they do from their home office. So in other words, if you are in a home office and you are there all of the time by yourself, that's one thing. But let's say, for example, that you're a representative of Google that goes to meet with companies, and I won't reveal who, but like I own a business. And you're meeting with the public. Well, if you're meeting with the public and you're working from home and you're a representative of Google, I think there's an obligation on your part to be vaccinated. So I think it depends on what the role is that one is doing if they have a home office.
See here, I'm reading the article, and it says, Google said in July, anyone working in the office should be vaccinated. Those who have or are able to find a 100% remote working role are not affected by this rule. But it has also said that it expects most employees to be in the office for at least 3 days a week, rather than continuing to work from home. It has also said it will cut pay for U.S. employees who continue to work remotely. Okay. So I'm sure there's I'm just as an example, if I was a Googler, and personally, I would choose to work from home, personally, so that I could live, on a beach in Thailand, as I already do. So, because my cost of living is I can get a 6-hand massage, for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I can, life's pretty sweet, I gotta say. So, and I'm more than happy to take a pay cut to do that because my cost of living is 25%, maybe even 20% of what it would be living in the Bay Area or the New England area, in California or New York. So I would be more than happy to take a 30-40% pay cut to do that. So does that, okay. Now that means that people who don't get vaccinated, one way to phrase that is to say people who don't get vaccinated will take a pay cut. Well, yeah, meaning they're going to work from home because they're actually getting the pay cut to work from home. The pay cut isn't actually specifically due to not wanting to get vaccinated. I mean, first of all, I'm not anti-vax, and I'm vaccinated. This isn't the issue. I'm not trying to promote, not getting vaccinated or anything like that. I'm trying to get into what is Google really saying in this letter, and then what are the journalists trying to make fire, out of some smoke here.
But Tyler, it probably will roll out by department. Like if you have 100% remote role, right? Because some roles,
Nope.
like,
Nope. Totally disagree with you, Jennifer, on this one. Because
well,
I
it
work for a
says they're working
company
from
that
home. It says if
So
you're working from
no,
home,
so I'm going to tell you, in the real world where I sit, I work for a large corporation. We can't work outside of our home country. Regardless of whether or not you've been vaccinated, regardless of whether or not you're going to choose 100% remote work from home, which they've given us an option to, you must provide your vaccination card by, I think it was December 7th is what we were told. I don't know the consequences, but I do know that you must provide your vaccination card, even if you're going to do 100% remote. It's just where the companies are going.
That's for Accenture, yeah?
Tyler,
Nope, that
no,
Accenture
she's at
actually,
Deloitte.
that
Tyler.
I don't know where I'm at, but no, Accenture, they actually gave people the boot if they didn't get vaccinated or provide a proof of a reason why they couldn't be vaccinated.
Tyler.
Yes.
It seems to be quite also a geographic choice
Yeah.
because when you work, and I think this is where I would agree with, I didn't hear 100% what Jennifer said, simply because you can't cross borders with your mandates. Because I have done a series of interviews with Capgemini, Deloitte, and Accenture overseas, and they're not that heavy handed on their mandates, especially when you're working with certain technological softwares. You've always had a remote job as a consultant. When you're working in the field, you're always remote, and they cannot force internationally that mandate because you're going across borders. So yes, it could be an American company like Accenture, but when they go to Nordics or they go to Netherlands or they go to Germany, they have to abide by what the rules are here. And that's kind of where that's why I said it may be US centric, but when it comes to international projects, I think that's where one has to sort of be having on the ground to the team within the country that they're speaking of, because I know here in Holland, they're asking for all three. So they're literally asking for a PCR test or the proof of vaccination or that you've recovered from COVID. And they're most certainly not telling you you don't have your job if you're not one of those three. But clearly, to your point, Tyler, if someone is in a position where their work's remote and they want to be 100% remote, then I would err on the side that I see your part of your hypothesis that it also starts saving them money. And I say this from the fact that a couple of banks in Europe have a huge layoff that's coming in first quarter 22, and they have already made some offers for people to stay working from home, not come back, take early time off. So they're doing a lot of things because the impact of COVID financially to business has been, I don't think the grandeur of it has been seen yet. And I think a lot of the companies now are just making sure that they're looking at their balance sheets and their numbers and their projections for into 22, and they're trying to identify those areas where they could actually start trimming some fat without being like a target of like workman's council or some sort of like dispute, disgruntled employee that says their constitutional rights have been violated, et cetera, et cetera.
So, Tyler, does Google provide health insurance to the employees as well?
Yeah.
Okay, so the article at the bottom is mentioning that people who are staying at home and their job roles are allowing them to stay home can choose, not choose, like it's okay for them to not vaccinate, but they really, the executive orders are for them to come back after January to workplace at least minimum 3 days. And those people, those employees who are coming back, who must come back to the office, must be vaccinated. There are exemption for religious and medical reasons and for people who are staying at home. But I'm thinking maybe there is another reason behind that, because people who get sick and go to the hospital, insurance companies have to pay the money, and then that kind of raises the cost for the companies who are providing health insurance. So maybe that's another layer behind the decision making and the policy, and the fact that they are trying to comply with President Biden's mandate for certain number of employees and companies that are larger to kind of mandate vaccination, to increase the vaccination in their employees, especially if they're coming back to the office.
Yeah, there's a few weird things going on where it says the vaccine mandate has not been universally accepted by employees. Several hundred Google workers have signed and circulated a manifesto opposing the company's requirements, which leadership said would apply to all employees, even those working from home, who engage directly or indirectly with federal government contracts. Well, that's I imagine a subsection of the people who work from
Yeah,
home.
subsection. The one who are working with the federal, related contracts, yes, they must comply. But the other one, and they said to look at your job description. If your job description is out of that kind of mandatory federal requiring aspect, if your job is out of that and you're staying home, then you may choose not to vaccinate.
The next paragraph says, in the latest guidance, Google details some options for those who don't want to get vaccinated. The company said employees can explore if there are any roles at Google that don't conflict with the executive order. They can also request exemptions for religious and medical conditions, which Google previously said would be granted on a case-by-case basis for employees whose roles that happen to fall outside of the scope of the executive order. That can also be performed out of the office. The company said they will be able to permanently work remotely going forward. I wish this was all more clear in the way that they're framing this, because I think they intentionally want to make it sound like they're going to be firing people who don't get vaccinated, when in reality, there's other options like working from home. I believe it's that simple. I believe
Yes, and in reality, it's more geared towards the employee who are directly working with the federal, job descriptions or
right.
associated with that.
If somebody was actually wanting to inform readers, they would say Google's going to require vaccine for people who come back to the office. Well,
Yes,
the problem
exactly.
is, right. Well, here's the problem. That headline isn't going to get any clicks. We've already seen that headline 6 months ago. So they needed to manufacture a new headline that says they're going to start firing people who don't comply, and try and drum up some unnecessary drama, when in reality it's the same. The headline should, if they were focused on intellectually honest, being intellectually honest, or that they're going to require vaccines for people at the office. Okay, well, that's great, but that's not. No one's going to click that headline.
Agree.
Google, so the headline says Google tells employees they'll eventually be fired if they don't follow vaccination rules. Really? Is that
And the vaccination rules is clearly stating that if you are not coming to office, you are exempted. You are exempted on religious basis, medical basis, and if you're not working in the federal companies directly, then you don't require vaccination.
it's just another example of
Clickbait.
yeah, just we can call it clickbait, you
Or
know.
drama inducing, or
No, it's just intentional misinformation is what I would call it, because and that's the regrettable bit you've heard me rant about endlessly, is we are
yeah, it's like similar headline like Elon Musk is quitting his job
correct.
on the same lines. Yes.
Correct. Yes.
Tyler,
So
but don't you have that follow up connected article about Facebook talking about misinformation and how it's actually opinion? Oh my God. Did you see that article? I don't know if I even got to tweet it out, but there's an article that's related that Facebook was talking about how the misinformation is actually from the people, but then they also said their fact checkers are providing their opinion as well by fact checking. So it's a bit of a conundrum. because now you're saying, what are you saying? It's like almost feel like they're trying to confuse people by how they're writing, in my opinion.
So next article, as Cheryl.
Actually, Tyler, can I just add to that?
Sure.
I'm sorry, but this is actually happening. This is not just an article that's out there that is misinformation. Companies are putting this mandate into effect, even for their employees that work from home. It's been happening in New York for the last 4 months. One of the largest health providing systems in New York has mandated all of their employees be vaccinated, including those that work in technology, who work from home, who've never worked on site, never worked in an office, and they've mandated their employees to be vaccinated or they will be fired. They've given them they gave them an initial date, which has come and gone, and they have not terminated all those employees, but they are refilling their positions. They're finding someone, training them, and then firing the employee when they don't get vaccinated. So this is a very real thing, and once with the new law that just came out in the state of New York State is requiring that every employee be vaccinated in the city. I'm sorry. And now you can actually ask for proof of vaccination from your employees. You can send out surveys to ensure that they're vaccinated with all the appropriate information. Like this is not just something that is being said. This is being implemented.
Yeah, I'm sure there's medical companies I don't know the name of, and I'm sure I did see the headlines about New York really cracking down. This headline that we're reading is about Google, and I'm
no, I understand. What I'm saying is that it started there and it's rolling out even and within technology departments of large organizations, not just healthcare providers. So, but it did start with the healthcare system, and now it's being rolled out across the board throughout manufacturing facilities in Brooklyn, Queens, throughout offices in the city. Yeah. And it doesn't matter. Remote workers, non-remote workers, everyone is being mandated to get vaccinated.
Well, that could be a state thing. Okay. Someone on Twitter Space is breathing heavy over there. Someone was trying to jump. No? Okay. So the next one that I have here, and Cheryl can share it in the Twitter Space. I'll pin it to the top of the Clubhouse room. It says, how Shine beat Amazon and reinvented fast fashion. A look at Chinese fast fashion online retailer Shine, as 2020 sales reportedly hit 10 billion thanks to knockoff items, a nimble supply chain, and social media. Let me pin it to the top of the room for those who are into that kind of thing. There it goes. Let's hope it sticks. It does. And here's the article. It says, by connecting China's garment factories with Western Gen Z customers, Shine ushered in a new era of ultra-fast shopping. Last year, Julie King, a 20-year-old art student and influencer from Texas, noticed that a particular kind of sweater vest was taking over the internet. Celebrities like Bella Hadid had been photographed wearing shrunken Argyle pattern styles, channeling classic 90s movies like Clueless. During a wave of millennia-area nostalgia, soon King found the perfect example in a thrift store, a child-sized pink and red knit vest that fit tight and cropped on an adult. Using herself as a model, King paired it with a jeans and a Dior bag, snapped a picture, and listed it for $22 on Depop, an eBay-like resellers app favored by Gen Zs. The vest sold instantly, and she quickly forgot about it, but a month or so later, King received a message from one of her Instagram followers. They alerted her that an obscure, now-defunct Chinese shopping site called Preguy was using her photo to sell its own cheap reproduction of that thrifted vest. Quote, seeing the pictures of me up on some random fast fashion website I'd never heard of before made me really upset, King said. Replicas of the vest soon began popping up in countless other clothing sites and e-commerce marketplaces, including Amazon, AliExpress, Walmart, and Shine. Over time, the image of King's torso would be altered, warped. Her body shape, at one point, another person's manicured hand was awkwardly photoshopped onto it. Eventually, retailers began using their own product photos, but that didn't make the experience any less surreal. Unknown brands with names like Gadget, V-Lot, and Weenia marketed their versions of the vest with jumbled strings of keywords. A vest that had started as one-off thrift find was now available for anyone to purchase, and often for an even lower price. As with many fashion trends, it has been plucked from social media and dropped into the frenzied machine of the global e-commerce market. It was multiplying almost of its own accord in the factories of China's swelling ultra-fast fashion industry. Over the past decade, thousands of Chinese clothing manufacturers have begun selling directly to international consumers online, bypassing retailers that traditionally sourced their products from the country. Equipped with English language social media profiles, Amazon seller accounts, and access to nimble garment supply chains, they fueled the acceleration of trends and flooded closets everywhere with a wave of impossibly cheap clothes. Yeah. So I have some firsthand experience in this regard. As some of you know, I had a clothing company in between my music career and my tech, getting into tech in 2007. In 2001, 2, and 3, I had a clothing company. And at that time, and I used to sell to Wet Seal and Forever 21 and Arden B and Nordstrom and a whole bunch of, and 600 different small boutiques internationally. And at that time, 2001 and 2, you were not allowed to manufacture in China and import it into the US. There was a block on that. And then in late 2002, early 2003, I forget which president it was in that year, made a deal with China to allow the importation of textile goods in exchange for China fixing their exchange rate to be more in line with what it should be. And what that did was, at our fashion shows, the big fashion show, it's called the Magic Show in Vegas, and where everyone descends twice a year and meets all of the buyers and sellers and manufacturers, and I had a booth there. And I was, doing quite well at that time. And the Chinese warehouse representatives would come into your booth for your fashion line and say, you can manufacture in China now. How much do you pay to make this shirt or skirt or dress or what jacket or what have you? And they were able to make it for 1/10 the cost that you were previously selling it for. So you would save $4, $5, $6, $7, $8, $9, $10 per item. And if you're selling a 10,000 piece order, that's $100,000 per order that you're saving. This is insanely huge money. So you could know then me and my other designer friends were all very, very excited that these Chinese warehouse representatives were offering to manufacture our clothes at 1/10 the price. However, no less than an hour later, the buyers from the big stores that I just named, who I sell to, Forever 21, Wet Seal, Arden B, the typical suspects, would come, Urban Outfitters, would come into your booth, and they've ordered from you, regularly over the years. And now they're not willing to pay what they used to pay because you can make your shit for 1/10 the price. So they're not going to pay you what they paid you last quarter, last season. They're going to pay you 1/5 what they used to pay you. They're not going to buy the jacket for $10. They're going to pay $2 because you can now make it for $1. So that essentially forced everyone to produce in China, because now you can't produce your shit in the US at the prices you used to do. So that forced me and many of my friends to make a very hard decision. Do we want to relocate all of our production to China or shut down? So we shut down. And that's actually why I ended up in Thailand, because my production team in downtown Los Angeles was Thai. And they were going to lose me and all of their other fashion brands who used them as a team. And they said, well, game over. We're going to move back to Thailand. You should come with us. And I did. So, and I'm glad I did. It's been a wonderful experience. But the point is, now what's happening in this story is the warehouses that do the manufacturing are selling direct, cutting out the retail, not only the fashion brand who puts the label in the garment and, designs it. Now they're cutting out the designer and the label and the retailer. They're all gone. They're going direct from the factory through the app, which is functioning like the e-commerce retailer, which takes way, 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 way less money than a traditional retailer, because a traditional retailer has to pay, for a store in the shopping mall or on high street. These e-commerce stores don't. So they're going essentially direct. They've really cut out a whole bunch of the cost, and that's of course they still have to come up with designs. But in this article, we just read how they come up with the designs. They see some image that goes a little bit viral in Instagram, and there's our factory made note. We don't need a designer coming to us and telling us what to manufacture. We know what to manufacture, and we can throw it directly on these on Shine, for example. And that's where the hot new thing where fashion is today. It's kind of wild to see how this has evolved, but it's worth noting how this game has evolved, because we're going to see the same essential moves happen in all of retail, all of shopping. All of the shit that you buy in the stores, all the stores that you shop at will soon be wiped out in very similar ways that the fashion shops the boutiques were all getting wiped out in this story, because the delivery companies who deliver all of your stuff will soon be doing deals with the factories directly. So again, the apps and the factories are going to bring you the stuff directly. They're going to cut out the need for the physical stores. You're just going to order stuff through these apps coming straight from the manufacturers directly. And then this is going to be a very hard pill for the middlemen, like the traditional shops and traditional brands who would pay to make this stuff in China to survive. So I think JT has a point. I think Katie wants to jump on the mic here. And but it's a really interesting point of what's going on. There's the last time we read about Shine, by the way, it was, they are getting huge. And as this article says, they're now competing with Amazon. One of the concerning things is that unlike in the EU, most notably, and to some extent the US, there isn't strong regulations around the types of toxic chemicals that are being used. And so now we're starting to see reports that a lot of the garments that are sold on Shine and even Wish is now banned in Canada, precisely because out of like 22 items they tested, half of them were toxic. They have toxins like mercury that you will get cancer from almost assuredly. So there is sort of a hidden cost to these incredibly cheap bargains. Katie?
Thanks, Tyler. The color and context to your personal story is fascinating there. I just want to put out one word. It's disintermediation.
Yeah.
And let anyone riff on that when we look back at how platforms in the tech space specifically have the power to immediately disintermediate. Think about the first generation of developers who built on Facebook, and then whoops, Facebook changes and those businesses just instantly go away. And what you've just described is the in real life factory supply chain. Where are those moments of disintermediation? And we should all take lessons for what we just saw across 10 years in tech. And just any founder or builder thinking, always be wary of, could I be disintermediated?
Yeah, and I want to apologize. It wasn't Canada that banned Wish. It was France that just banned them on November 24th.
Another fascinating fact is the churn out number, which is 20% more than Zara and H&M combined, and the number of products, which is between 10,000 and more, dependent on this software model that they are using called LATR, and you can read about that, which is a kind of product made in small numbers and based on the software algorithm and data from the individual sellers, collecting that information, churning out that information quickly, figuring out which style and model is selling fast, and then reproducing multiple numbers of that item, taking over the churning model, which is in the article, fast production, and producing in large quantities the numbers of articles that are outselling, and also gamifying their products, gamifying the whole shopping experience using other Chinese shopping models. That's getting the Gen Z attention and giving point system as well. So the algorithm or software they're using, LATR, is helping them.
Okay. So the next article is that Apple quietly removes all mentions of CASM scanning on its child safety webpage after significant criticism of the plan to scan for child sexual abuse images. And this is a story that started, geez, when was that, guys? Almost 3 months ago, at least 2 months ago, where it was revealed that Apple was going to start doing this kind of image scanning on your devices and in the cloud. And and then cybersecurity experts and others started raising some flags saying, this should be very carefully considered before moving forward. And Apple said, well, what's the big deal? We've been doing this in your iCloud photos since 2019. So Apple has quietly nixed all mentions of CSAM, its child safety webpage, suggesting its controversial plan to detect child sexual abuse images on iPhones and iPads may hang in the balance following significant criticism of its methods. Apple in August announced and planned a suite of new child safety features. That's when we became familiar with it, including scanning users' iCloud photos libraries for child sexual abuse material, communication safety to warn children and their parents when receiving or sending sexually explicit photos, and expanded guidance in Siri and search. Following their announcement, the features were criticized by a wide range of individuals and organizations, including security researchers and Edward Snowden, and the EFF, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, Facebook's former security chief, politicians, policy groups, university researchers, and even some Apple employees. The majority of criticism was leveled at Apple's planned on-device image detection, which was lambasted by researchers for relying on dangerous technology that bordered on surveillance, and derided for being ineffective at identifying images of child sexual abuse. Because the child abuse image scumbags who trade in this filth are very adept and have known this game for a very long time. And they intentionally alter the images so that the fingerprints don't detect them. They know that the stuff's being fingerprinted. They don't want to risk spending the rest of their lives being raped in jail for sending some photos. So they go to lengths to use apps to distort the images. And you can throw in a batch of 1,000 images and distort all of them in 1 minute, in a very customized way. There's very convenient little apps to do that. And every time somebody does that, it makes them undetectable to the fingerprints. Now, I had a meeting last week with a truly brilliant startup from Norway who has figured out a way to detect the images even if they're edited. And it can not only do images, but even do something far more difficult, which is the children abuse videos. Because it can detect facial recognition of the people in the videos and objects in the video, and the relationship of the objects it has an understanding of what's in the image or the videos, and so it has a far more intelligent or intelligence in determining, if this is the original photo or an edited version of it, even if it's cropped severely, or even warped, or had the flipped or rotated or whatever. It doesn't matter. You could have it upside down and flipped and warped and changed and black and white. Doesn't matter. It would still have the sort of the face print like fingerprint of what's going on in the image or video. And Facebook is using this. It's one of their biggest clients. Strangely, the person who they were working with at Facebook isn't maybe has moved on or whatever. And so I'm trying to help them reconnect with higher up the food chain. And in fact, Michelle, who joins us very regularly here in Tech News, who works at Facebook, is actually helping escalate it to the teams at Facebook so they can get things back on track. Anyway, it's a fascinating technology that I did not know existed, and I didn't know Facebook was already using it. And they plan to, work with all the massive, probably Twitter now, any image or video based solution, because they have a really impressive algorithm that's able to do this. So, but
I'm guessing convolutional neural networks are part of this, right?
Yeah. And I hope that could be a appeasable solution to this, privacy conundrum, because it comes down to this conundrum between privacy and catching bad people. Similar with all facial recognition comes down to that essentially. I mean, people love catching bad guys. They hate the idea of losing privacy, and there's obviously a bit of a trade-off in when it comes to using tech to do those things. And I hope that there's some compromise to be made in this regard.
I mean, the trouble is that the same thing can be used to do facial recognition in videos of protest rallies, right?
That's right.
So it's very problematic either way you look at it.
Yeah. So the next article is from the Financial Times. They say they have sources that the United States will ban 8 Chinese companies. Did I tell you we were going to continue the endless banning until all of the Chinese companies are banned? I told you, right? Financial Times says they have sources. The U.S. will ban 8 more Chinese companies, including DJI, the biggest drone company in the world, for their alleged involvement in the surveillance of Uyghur Muslims. Oh boy, there's a double whammy. American investor. This is again the FT. American investors will be banned from groups. Oh, so who let the dogs out? Was that you, Squad Bliss? I'm going to mute your mic just to be sure. Okay, welcome back, Dave. It says in the article from the Financial Times, the American investors will be barred from taking stakes in groups accused of involvement in Uyghur abuses. So not only is the U.S. banning them, they're banning Americans from even investing in them. So this is it's almost like a sanction. And that's the essence of the article. The Biden administration will place 8 Chinese companies, including DJI, the world's largest commercial drone manufacturer, on an investment blacklist for their alleged involvement in the surveillance of Uyghur Muslim minorities. The U.S. Treasury will put DJI and other groups on its Chinese military industrial complex companies blacklist on Thursday. That's today, according to 2 people briefed, tomorrow rather. According to 2 people briefed on the move, U.S. investors are barred from taking financial stakes in the 60 Chinese groups already on the blacklist. The measure marks the latest efforts by U.S. President Joe Biden to push China for its repression of Uyghurs and other Muslim ethnic minorities in the northwestern Xinjiang province. This week, SenseTime, the facial recognition software company, postponed its planned initial public offering in Hong Kong after the Financial Times reported that the U.S. was set to place the company on the blacklist. The other Chinese companies that will be blacklisted on Thursday include Megvii, SenseTime's main rival, which is the facial recognition company that last year halted plans to list in Hong Kong after it was put on a separate U.S. blacklist, and Dawning Information Industry, a supercomputer manufacturer that operates cloud computing services in Xinjiang. Also to be added are CloudWalk Technology, a facial recognition software company, Zhenmin Maya Pico, a cybersecurity group that works with law enforcement, Yito Technologies, an artificial intelligence company, Leon Technologies, a cloud computing company, and NetPosa, a producer of cloud-based surveillance systems. And DJI and Megvii are not publicly traded, but Dawning Information, which is also known as Sugun, is listed in Shanghai and blah, blah, blah. All 8 companies are already on the Commerce's Department entry list, which restricts U.S. companies from exporting technology or products from America to these Chinese groups without obtaining a government license that they will never ever get. The White House did not comment, and the Treasury did not respond to a request for comment. DJI declined to comment. Everyone's declining to comment. But I told you this was going to happen. I predicted all of this, and it's going to continue to happen.
But Tyler, look,
Yeah.
can I ask this? Can I get a question? Just your opinion on this.
Yeah.
Don't you think we should probably try to choose our battles with China carefully, because we have to be able to get along with them to some extent? Okay, we can't pick every little instance that we disagree with them, and take some sort of action against them, because they could retaliate in many ways. Forget about invading Taiwan or anything. I mean, even in what they did under Trump, where they retaliated by on our agriculture products, I mean, so which caused a lot of problems in the Midwest. So I'm just thinking that we should probably more carefully select where we want to draw a line, and just realize we're not going to agree with them on everything. And for example, I do not think barring American investors from these drone companies are going to change their policies towards the Uyghurs one bit. So basically, it's just it's just like
That,
spitting in their face, and
yeah,
so yeah.
it's well. I like where your head's at with this. The idea is if we contemplate this chess move that the U.S. and China find themselves at, where the U.S. wants to have China in an economic scenario where we reduce all spending into China like this, where we're not even letting people invest in those companies, let alone partner with them or share, hardware or information or software. So no Americans are allowed to even buy the stock on the stock market, and we want to economically, I guess, punish is a strong word, but we want to restrict as much income, as many dollars as possible from going from into China, as much, and we're telling all of our allies to do the same. Now, if that's happening, by the way, that's happening in a very big way, so much so that China would love to retaliate. I think you're exactly right. I think China normally, I mean, just following how the relationship has gone over the years, China would love to retaliate, exactly as you're saying, by saying, hey, you know what? Okay, well, in that case, we're not going to send you any fertilizers that you need to grow food and all of this important stuff that you have been dependent on from China.
No, they wouldn't buy it. We were shipping our agricultural products like soybeans over to them, and then all of a sudden, those markets got closed off. And so what Trump ended up doing, which cost all of us money if you're a U.S. taxpayer, he basically had a federal bailout of farmers. He wrote large checks to
Yeah.
bail them out of the situation because they couldn't move their crops overseas. Yeah.
No, my point is that China would love to withdraw things that we want, like masks. Well, they did do that, but other things that American medicines, for example, there's a ton of medicines that are made in China, and China can say, "Oh, well, okay, well then you're not going to get medicine anymore." And the point is, I think economically, if the U.S. continues to reduce the amount of dollars and other currencies going into China, China is going to need to sell whatever they have to whoever they can, and they're not really in a position to reduce sales to anyone anywhere. So they're still continuing to allow Apple to operate there, for example. Although that's a whole separate deal that we read last week, that Apple did a special sweetheart under the table deal for $275 billion to stay there for 10 years unimpeded, which is probably why they're still there. By the way, that deal is the report that we read was a 10-year deal that expires next year. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens with Apple.
Under what table, Tyler? The
Yeah,
Chinese table
yeah.
or the American table?
Yeah, I,
You
I don't think the
know,
Americans knew. I think obvious. No, well, the report that we read was that it was basically a the T money to the CCP to let Apple do business in China for 10 years, and that was the what they paid.
yeah, well, if that deal ends next year, the American government can't do a thing about it.
Yeah, but I think it's really interesting, the economic trade relations where, and the one that I worry about is the medicines, because I think most Americans and most of the world aren't aware the degree to how dependent most countries are on the medicines that are produced in China. So um, I don't know why they're not retaliating.
And the viruses for which we need them. No,
Yeah,
I'm just kidding.
yeah. No, but I think you're right, Ken. I think at some point they probably will retaliate and withhold those. If they can economically afford to do that, they'll do that. But then it gets really escalated.
And by the way, if we hurt them economically too much, I'm just
Yeah,
giving
yeah,
you all the scenarios,
yeah,
then they won't have money to buy our bonds. They've been historically, they're not as big as they used to be, but they were a big buyer of our bonds,
sure,
treasury bonds, which kept our interest rates down. So
yeah,
there's a lot of factors to consider. And I'm
yeah,
not saying you should never take a stand with them. I mean, I would definitely take a stand with Taiwan or something, because I think there's a critical, worldwide interest there. But there's a lot of other stuff where, we should probably think about where do we want to draw a line.
yeah,
I think every time we get to thinking America first, we realize how interconnected all of our economies actually are.
Yep. Okay. There's a few more.
Tyler, can I just ask a quick question? Because the
Sure.
companies that you mentioned in that article all had to do with like facial recognition and
Yep.
tech. Were there any other companies mentioned in that? Because I'm curious if it has any ties to the fact that it's actually facial recognition with all the other things we've seen out of
Yeah. Well,
China with.
yeah. This was 8 more that were added today under this, Uyghur, concept, and which is now totaled up to 60. And so that raises the question: is that does that seem correct that there would be 60 companies that are cooperating with the Uyghur? Um, that sounds like a lot of companies. That's just I kind of read over that kind of quickly, but that's the thought that went through my head when I read that. But I think the U.S. wants to ban lots of Chinese companies, and I said that they would continue to do this. I'm happy to predict that we have not seen the end of the companies that will be added to these, you know, very severe blacklists, as the U.S. seems to be focused on intentionally decoupling economically and reshoring, and they're telling their allies to do the same. So it seems to me rather non-ambiguous that they're working to reduce, China's influence and economy. And the DJI is a huge interglobal, it's a massive, massive company that sells billions of drones, everywhere. And I imagine the U.S. is telling, we could find out if are there other countries banning DJI. I bet they are, and the fact that they are implicates that the U.S. is telling other countries, "Hey, you should ban DJI and these other Huawei and all these other Chinese companies." Because if we all of us ban all of their big export companies all simultaneously, economically they go over a cliff. That seems to be what's happening.
Yeah, but Tyler, another one of their Chinese real estate companies just defaulted on their major one defaulted on their debt the other day. I
Yep.
mean, if Biden was a little bit sharper, in my view, he'd let this real estate thing play out for a couple of months to see what kind of damage it already does to their economy, self inflicted, so that without causing an international stir, because it might be significant enough if you want harm, if you want to damage the Chinese economy, there might be enough self inflicted wounds because they're so dependent on this real estate bubble. Let's see how that sorts out in 3 months. I don't see the urgency to do all of this. I mean, the technology stuff is a little bit different if you're talking about like dual use and you don't want them having a military edge. But other than that, I think we should be a little bit more circumspect about what we're doing. But that's my view.
Gotcha.
Particularly if we're looking to block supplies and we already have a supply chain issue.
Yep.
Can I add a few thoughts, please, Tyler?
Of course.
I was just wondering, all the things that have been said so far are very valid, and what Annette said, and I think Ken said about being circumspect and so on. I think we have to remember that COVID has been around for almost 2 years now, and the difficulties that were experienced with getting things when countries were locked down and the subsequent supply chain issues. I think large companies, the chemical companies, the pharmaceutical companies, have been aware of this for some time, and I'd be very surprised if the risk assessment practices weren't and committees weren't actively engaged over the last 12 months at least in trying to figure out what the implications might be, because the writing's been on the wall for some time now, made so blatantly obvious with COVID and the issues from COVID. And I'd be very surprised if these big pharmaceutical companies haven't created other plans. And in fact, haven't some of them actually mentioned that they're opening up production areas in India and even Africa, and obviously in Europe, ramping that up too? I think there must be things going on. So while we might be reliant on China for a heck of a lot of stuff, I think people have used this time of COVID lockdown to actually engage with that and think what the alternatives might be. So, as Ken was saying, the Evergrande and the housing, the property thing, there's a lot of stuff that's on shaky ground at the moment, and this probably is what helping facilitating China's wolf warrior sort of very aggressive stand and social media voice. So hopefully it'll all come together. But so much is happening, and there are lots of balls in the air, and I really don't know where they'll fall. None of us do, but they will fall. We just have to be ready for them. Thank you. That's just my 2 bits.
Appreciate it. I'm just having a DM here with Pierre real quick.
Yeah, I'd just add on the China front. Look, I think China's not as formidable as they once felt 10 years ago when this, as Pat rightly alludes to, wolf warrior diplomacy first started. That was always what China was intending to do. They'd only just never really done it. They'd always stayed in the background a little bit and allowed their economy and general sort of international capabilities improved. And now, particularly under President Xi, we've seen China really push back against, what they feel is the American-led international order, and they're simply doing, in their eyes, what they feel they should be able to, which is, and what any other country would do, which is push their self-interests, push their national interests, and it's all part of their desire to regain national rejuvenation. That's why Taiwan, but as Ken rightly points out, and others, the issue with Evergrande is a concern. The housing crisis is certainly something that's going to put more internal pressure on the Chinese economy. And then you've obviously got the demographic crisis. For every 100 women, you've got about 120 men, and a lot of those, a large proportion of that population will be entering retirement soon. So you're going to have a very, very high dependency ratio, and that's going to put pressure on the healthcare system. It's going to put pressure on social securities. So China's definitely not in a easy position. And at the end of the day, when it comes to foreign policy and just international engagement, your domestic status at home. Look at America. The internal divide in the US is affecting the ability for a coherent foreign policy strategy under Biden. So it's definitely not something China is going to have an easy walk of life. And I think the biggest asset the Americans have is the alliance system. And when it comes to tech, having a cooperative, coordinated approach, a framework in place to push back against what we were touching upon earlier, I think will be one of the best ways to protect and also overcome any threats from malign actors like China. Thanks for letting me share.
The next article is that the UK's CMA, Central Market Authority, think FTC from the US, who focuses on monopolies and things, issues a interim report voicing concern over Apple and Google's vice-like grip on the mobile ecosystem, hinting at future antitrust action. Makes sense. Benedict Evans from used to be at Andreessen Horowitz and is also happens to be British, tweeted about it, saying that the UK CMA, the competition authority, just published its interim report on mobile ecosystems about APIs, app stores, browsers, and browser engines. 681 pages. And he says he has 2 observations, and I'm sharing his tweet to our Tech News Twitter account. He has these 2 observations. Number 1, this is a lot of work by one dedicated agency on one quite narrow topic. They actually read the 10K that reflects a difference in the institutional structure and funding of regulation between the US and most of its peers. And number 2, this isn't a lawsuit. There won't really be a court case, and no one has to persuade a judge that Apple and Google broke a law written in the 19th century before they can try to change the market structure. Again, a different institutional structure for regulation. And a last, more general point, if one looks both at the Giphy case, which is the GIF engine that Facebook bought, and the U.S. Constitution's block on content moderation laws, how much is the U.S. going to become a net receiver of regulation written in foreign jurisdictions and applied de facto to U.S. companies operating in the USA? Interesting question. So it looks like more regulation for U.S. big tech in the UK in the near future. pending Biden interjecting and saying, let us handle it, and global politics doing what it does. So the next one is from Reuters, a company called Anchorage Digital, which offers institutions digital asset services for secure crypto custody, trading, and more, raises $350 million at $3 billion valuation. Twitter rolls out automatic video captions, support for over 30 languages, but not for previously uploaded videos. Well, not yet anyways. And that's quite an interesting, there's more to that development than meets the eye. Because, here's why. The web used to be text. It used to be blogs. And then it became photos and videos and audio chat rooms. And videos have text, but you have to pull it out through these transcriptions. And Google built quite a big business by building a bunch of spiders and bots that crawled the text web and organizing all those texts and making a search engine to find all that text. And then when YouTube came out, they decided, we must buy YouTube because now the web is no longer going to be text blogs. It's going to be videos. And we need to pull the text out of those videos and include it in our search engine. And that's why half the searches you do now, or I should say every search you do now, a good percentage of those have videos as a recommended source for the result of your search, because there was people in that video talking about what you wanted, where in the past it used to be only text-based websites, And now these social audio rooms are also very interesting because they're essentially like videos. It's just hours and hours of endless text in the form of voice that you must transcribe into 30 different languages, according to this article. This is where it gets really, really interesting, because if Twitter can now transcribe all videos in Twitter going forward, it's actually not that hard to go backward and apply it to all previous videos. And it's also very technically barely any different to doing a Twitter Space room that was previously recorded. So you can now, and by the way, this was also a prediction that hopefully somebody in one of these rooms can confirm that I made, that to Twitter, this social audio thing of Clubhouse and Twitter Spaces, the reason it's so interesting to them is because it's nothing less than the future of a search engine. And this is why Google must be thinking about buying or replicating something like Clubhouse if it were to become a popular new media format. Because just like videos replaced blogs, social audio could eat some percentage of videos. And if Twitter builds a search engine, this is a lot of content. So for example, in the near future, you could do a search, maybe on Google, maybe imagine some other brand that, were to evolve. And when you do a search, you of course will get links to websites that are related to your search. You search for pink pajamas, and you're going to find websites about pink pajamas, or you might be referred to videos on YouTube about pink pajamas, or in the near future, you'll get social audio rooms that are both simultaneously live rooms about pink pajamas and historical, what they would call canonical rooms about pink pajamas. And the question
Hey,
is,
Tyler, this is
right as I'm about to make my climax of my point here. So the question is, what percentage of your future searches will be served by text websites versus videos versus live audio rooms that are currently happening right now that you can join, where they're talking about that issue, hopefully with some experts in the room, and or historical pre-recorded audio rooms where they hopefully had some experts in those rooms as well. And this is why the future of social audio is so potentially huge, because I believe if I'm searching for, some rash, I can imagine mothers looking for rashes on their babies. And do you want to read a blog? Do you want to watch a video? Do you want to talk in a room with other mothers and doctors talking about some rash that broke out in Southern California? Well, I probably want to go into a live audio room and talk to real experts about, to me, that might be and hopefully there's some doctors in the room. And what if I want to learn how to be the world's best underwater ping pong player? Do I want a text website? Do I want a video? Do I want a room full of people who are passionate about underwater ping pong playing? I think I want to go into a room with other people who share that passion and talk with the other experts in that area. This is why social audio is so interesting, because not just the live rooms, but the pre-recorded rooms, due to the transcriptions. And by the way, Twitter already has live transcriptions in the live rooms right now, which probably means they also are that's embedded in the historical file. When you have a historical room that has already occurred, that the text for that room is already there and is probably indexable and searchable. So this whole point that I've been making about social audio since I don't know, a year ago is I think I was correct with how this is going to evolve. And it's that, to me, this is why Clubhouse and the social audio format is so wildly interesting. It's because of when you have enough of it that you can apply really good search to it. And Clubhouse is correctly focused on that. And I think Twitter is too. And I think that's why this is a huge opportunity for Twitter. And this is why everybody copied it when it came out. So sorry to whoever I interrupted.
This is Heather. I just wanted to say, like, Tyler, you're 100% right. And it's happening right now, right when Clubhouse came out with the profile link that you can share to others. That's when things started to becoming indexable. And they're starting to do that with the rooms, because when you notice in your hallway here, there are missed rooms you have missed, and you can look in your search and look up specific rooms that are historical, and then they're coming up within Google. So you're 100% right, Tyler. It's already happening. And it's going to continue to happen, to be indexed by Google. I mean, there already are internal search engines within these social media profiles, and SMO has been around for a while. It's just that now it's being picked up by the social audio, which I think is huge. And it's just going to give us more content to disseminate across platforms.
It could also be something that a lot of people would be conscious of what they say, right? It will make it much, much easier now to have, a lot of people saying something that may affect their careers, they may affect the political views, and some, like what we have been talking about even in Clubhouse, how there are some rooms, for example, with some countries' spies or things like that. So I think people will be a lot more measured in what they say, because they know that their voice could be somewhere forever and somebody can find it very easily. So that it's just that our privacy and data becomes so much easier for any nefarious use. I think that's the other side of the coin.
And
Yeah, very
when
good point.
once it this progresses to doing voice recognition on the audio and searching on the full text, we will feel differently, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, few notes here. So what Messi mentioned is actually really a concern because I think the next step is going to be able to have these rooms that are also public. You don't have to be subscribed to Clubhouse or have an account in Clubhouse for you to be able to see the content. A lot of people are doing this outside of the box. They're taking the MP4 file that comes with the recording and throwing it on YouTube or something, or on whatever, and to get this content out. But there is also going to be that possibility of opening this up to the public. So that's number one. Number two, on Clubhouse getting bought by someone, if you've seen startups that are getting bought, Clubhouse is absolutely fits the profile of a company that's being groomed to be, this nice little package that gets acquired by someone big. And my money is also on Google, because their social footprint is really minimal, other than YouTube. I know YouTube is huge, but they've got nothing outside of that compares to any of the big players right now. And it may be good for Clubhouse to have someone with deep pockets like that. And then another thing is there is going to be like a reason
to be able to do searches inside the audio of these rooms, so that companies like record labels and stuff like that will be able to either monetize on the music that's being played for with their content, or maintain their copyrights on actions that are being done in social rooms, and where you may be not allowed to actually broadcast music that is copyrighted in these rooms, and therefore they are entitled to either block you or share some or take some of your revenue if this becomes monetized. So there is a driving force for this going mainstream, and since there is like this kind of driving force, I think it's going to happen, and I think a big company, most likely, I believe Google is going to be picking up Clubhouse, and I think the owners of Clubhouse already know this, and they probably want this. And the only other competitor is under Twitter, or valid competitor is Twitter Spaces, and that one is already doing really well. I see rooms with thousands of people in them. So we'll see how this plays.
And YouTube has already worked out music licensing.
Correct. Absolutely. They're already done with that. Now, if they can somehow mesh the two together, so you can play music from YouTube inside your Clubhouse with the rights going to the right company, or whatever proceeds going to the right company, then, hey, there is a business model there.
There's also, for folks who haven't been in the tech game for a long time, it was around 2010 when Google was trying to buy Twitter, because Google realized, there's a whole lot of indexable, content in text within Twitter that they wanted to use. And, Twitter wasn't that good of a search engine, because that's a very difficult technology to build, which is a really usable search engine. And Google ended up not happening, but it's
Twitter, it's still a bad search engine.
doing search is very, very, very difficult, and Google does it mind-blowingly well. And Google could do it incredibly well with Twitter, and they intentionally don't include, they don't send you to a lot of tweets when you do Google searches. They're not just randomly throwing you to Twitter because they don't own Twitter. They do throw you to YouTube a lot because they own YouTube, and they own, and they, can do the ad network inside of there as well. Anyway, so there was one other little personal story on Twitter, and the headline today about doing automatic video captions with 30 different languages. I remember having lunch one time with Biz Stone in 2007 at Twitter HQ when they were just getting started, and because I speak Japanese and read Japanese, and I was in Japan was one of the first countries outside of the U.S. to really take on Twitter because of Masayoshi-san from SoftBank. He was like kind of the first big power user in Japan. He loved Twitter, and I told Twitter that Masa loves Twitter, and I think he's going to try and buy it. And in fact, he did want to do that, and they did. And and then Ev went to go meet with Masa at SoftBank at one point. But I remember telling Ev, the ability to have this international. If I wish people could read the Japanese tweets that I see, and that, if there was a real time transcription button, so that you could follow people who don't speak your native languages and then transcribe their tweets, that would be amazing. And, you could probably use Bing for something like that. And I remember, I'll never forget Biz's eyes getting huge at that idea of like, oh shit, that he loved this idea of, the world coming together and dissolving these language barriers through Twitter, which I think happens quite a bit. I mean, I follow quite a few people of languages that I don't speak natively, and I think those are some of the best accounts I follow. Anyhow, so it plays into this, the fact that they're doing these language transcriptions on video actually speaks more into the whole search ability, and how the fact that their Twitter Spaces rooms are constructed in the back end, and in terms of the media files, they're essentially like videos because they let you record the rooms. They're essentially videos. So now you're going to have 30 different languages of transcription on those Twitter Spaces rooms, all the canonical rooms. Those can be indexed. That's incredibly valuable for doing, if you're building a content library to build some sort of search capability on top of. Anyway, so the next article is from VentureBeat. No Name Security, which automatically discovers and remediates API vulnerabilities, raises $135 million. API security startup called Sequence, spelled wrong with a C, because we're geeks, everybody, raises $60 million. And Warsaw and London-based company called Ramp, a non-custodial crypto payments infrastructure startup, raises $52 million from Balderton. And the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, the DHS, launches Hacked DHS, a bug bounty program that pays hackers between $500 and $5,000 per flaw found in the system. Aren't very big prizes, by the way. DHS, you might want to add a zero to those numbers. The next one is Innovacer, which aggregates medical data for institutions, raises $150 million. A look at the industry-backed smart home standard called Matter, slated for mid-2022, and whether it can achieve its promise to fix smart home interoperability. And we've been hearing about this from time to time. When it was announced, basically all the hardware companies, the IoT, Internet of Things, one of the friction points is they're not interoperable. So, for example, you constantly have to look at the camera that you're buying to see if it fits with Apple or Alexa or Google Assistant or whatever, and then the light system that you buy, that it works with your device. And what happens then if you build your smart home to work with the Apple HomeKit and then you switch to an Android phone? Now you're screwed. Well, the whole point of this initiative called Matter, this smart home standard of interoperability, is that everything should work with everything all the time. And they apparently have it going, and IKEA's in it, and all the hardware manufacturers. By the way, every device manufacturer wants this to happen because they don't want to have to make two separate versions of their light bulbs and their door locks and their garage door openers and all the smart trash cans and what have you. And kudos to the big players like the Googles and Amazons and Alexas for allowing this to happen. And they're hoping it'll be ready mid-2022, called Matter. So you no longer have to worry about devices working with each other or not. They just will all auto-magically work, as they should. Like the internet, like USB cables work with pretty much every device, like that. That would be nice. So
As
What would
they
also be
should.
So it
great is
will
if I
work
didn't.
between Windows, Apple, all the other system, or just the devices that are in the same system?
all systems interoperable. So the next one is that a Bengaluru based company, JustPay, which unifies diverse payment options in its app, raises $60 million from SoftBank. India approves a $10 billion plan to attract semiconductor and display manufacturers. A source says Foxconn and others want to set up semiconductor factories in India. And the next one's from the New York Times, how China helps foreign influencers in the country who spread pro-China messages, funding their travel, generating lucrative, likely inauthentic traffic. Okay. And again, we do not pick the order or even the articles at all that we read here. And the New York Times is doing this piece, and it's a really interesting piece. I actually saw this one. It's by Paul Moser, who covers China tech or Asia tech for the New York Times, and he's one of my favorite journalists, by the way. Although he got kicked out of China and then was hanging in Hong Kong and Taiwan, as nearly all Chinese, global international reporters were all kicked out of China because he tried to go investigate the Uyghurs, and China didn't like that the New York Times was going kind of rogue on their own over to Xinjiang, and they stopped Paul. Hey, Paul, where are you going? Oh, I was just looking for a Starbucks, sir. And it doesn't work like that. And then all journalists all got kicked out of China simultaneously because they don't want journalists going over to Xinjiang and figuring out what's going on there. So this is an interesting story, and we should mention, Cheryl, I just accepted your request to co-host, and then Evan speaking. Okay. So there's a YouTuber that goes by the name of Sea Milk. His account is called LaoY86, And LaoY86 broke this story wide open 3 weeks ago on his YouTube account, where he was offered money by the CCP because he's a YouTube influencer who talks about China. They mistakenly assumed that meant he was pro-China because he speaks fluent Mandarin and reads fluent Mandarin and lived there for 10 years. His girlfriend's from China. He traveled all over China. He eventually left China. He's now in the US, and he still is doing a lot of videos about China, about life in China, whatever. Really fantastic videos. And he did a video 3 weeks ago that says the CCP just tried to pay me to promote false narratives of what's happening in China. And then in the email correspondences, he was included as part of some of these other influencers who are still based in China, most of them Americans, a few Brits, who are being paid by China to make YouTube videos. By the way, YouTube's banned in China, but somehow magically these 5 or to 10 white dudes are able to make YouTube videos that are very pro-Chinese. And they're ridiculously pro-Chinese, and they have the same scripts. Oh, did I forget that part? Where they're nearly saying the same things verbatim? And they go to
Yeah, they'll get that part fixed eventually.
They'll work out the bugs. But they all head to Xinjiang all in the same week and, start, saying about how great life is in Xinjiang. And, this is how it is. And here, I'm just an American visiting Xinjiang. Isn't life great here? Oh, and never mind that email thread that LaoY86 found that I got paid $5,000 for coming over here and making these videos. So by CGTN, which is the Chinese arm of media. So the New York Times has this piece exposing Bennett and these foreign puppets, mouthpieces, who are being paid by the CCP to make propaganda on YouTube. And by the way, I've experienced some of this in Clubhouse myself recently, like a few days ago, where Cheryl can confirm, I spent about 8 hours in one room hosted by folks nearly identical to the folks that this article is about on YouTube.
What was the content in the room, or what kind of things were shared?
The title of the room was Human Rights, U.S. versus China.
Yeah, you're just asking for it with a title like that.
So, I brought up how Jimmy Lai, the billionaire founder from Hong Kong, who behind Apple Daily, who was 48 hours ago arrested along with a dozen other civil rights attorneys and lawmakers, former politicians, former parliament members of the Hong Kong parliament, for commemorating Tiananmen Square in Hong Kong. Now, of course, it's illegal to do that in China. And of course, nobody's doing it in China because they don't, at this point, half the people don't even know Tiananmen Square happened because China goes to incredible great lengths to ban any mention of it anywhere in any website or social media. In fact, even in Taiwan, if you try to Google, China's forcing Apple to ban the word Tiananmen Square from searches in Taiwan.
Forcing is a little strong with stuff. They're paying them quite handsomely for it.
Okay,
with,
fair enough.
Lots of market access.
Enticing. So, market access, yes. So, it's, my point is, I mentioned that Jimmy Lai, 24 hours before we were in that room this weekend, I said, well, how can you make Jimmy Lai and these other civil rights lawyers and politicians were arrested and jailed for remembering Tiananmen Square, and they're in Hong Kong. They're not in China.
So, Tyler, this is classic whataboutism. If you don't know the phrase, look it up. It was a Soviet-era tactic during the Cold War when we used to talk about human rights in the Soviet Union. And we'd say, well, you're locking people up in the gulag. And they would say, well, what about your civil rights in the South and your segregation? So that was the deflection, whataboutism, and it's just more of the same.
Well, then he brought up these influencers who are now in the New York Times today saying, oh, well, you can go on YouTube and you can see people have gone to Xinjiang or whatever. And I knew that Sea Milk, Lawai86, had already done the expose. I didn't mention it to him. I knew that these YouTubers were a farce, but I'm glad to see the New York Times is now exposing it. And more interestingly, I said, well, let's think about what I did say about it. Was I pointed out the fact that Paul from the New York Times and every notable journalist in China has been very immediately kicked out when they started wanting to go to Xinjiang to investigate. And I said, I agree with him that we shouldn't necessarily allow American journalists to go investigate there because they might have a bias. But there are, roughly 200 countries. Certainly we could agree on some countries' journalists that should be allowed to go there and investigate. So why is there none? Literally zero. Why are no journalists globally allowed to go anywhere near Xinjiang to report on what's going on there? Which, of course, he had no answer for. But we do have the 10 white YouTubers who all have the same script, which Laway86 just revealed are being paid by the government.
So I mean, there's an older one that's not just like there was stuff like I think it was like McKinsey, I think, was in some hot water for this. It was 2018 or so, where they hosted their big corporate company retreat with their these are the guys that advise all the CEOs of one of the big consulting firms or ever, and they decided to go on a camping trip over in the deserts of that region, and they're just like just a few miles away from those from where all the camps are, where they're doing their education and stuff. And if you pay enough money, you can get people to say all sorts of things. And for them, what did they do with it? Well, they pocketed that cash and then told everyone, you should invest more in China. You should move our operations there. So, I mean, we've been having this happen for a long time. This is just the most recent one. It's got like some sexy new part of it. It's like some Gen Z platform people haven't heard about. It's a little more interesting when you start looking at the boardroom and looking at the corporations of who's already known about these abuses and has said, yeah, let's move more manufacturing there. I'm benefiting quite handsomely from it, so I don't see any problem.
So
it's epidemic on the B2B side too, and the industrial commercial side. I mean, in my space, telecom, Huawei pays millions to influencers. They offered me money to promote their products and infrastructure and solutions.
I took their money to promote their products at my events.
Right. So this is nothing new in that regard, and they're just upping their game.
They should have more writers next time, Tyler, when they sponsor your event. No Chinese dissidents, no folks from Hong Kong.
You want to hear a really good story? So Huawei approached me because I had Ericsson and Huawei are competitors. Ericsson has been a sponsor of mine for a long time. Huawei approached me to promote they got banned from using Android's App Store, the Google Play Store. So they had to make their own, and they had to get the message out to app developers to resubmit their apps separately to the new Huawei Harmony OS App Store. Although it would require only an incredibly minor change to their app, like one line of code. But they needed to get the word out quickly because there were no apps in their app store. So I helped get that message out through my events, and they paid me rather handsomely for that. So if I could go back in time, I probably wouldn't have. Anyway, here's the other crazy story. I used to work with Hong Kong on developing the Hong Kong tech ecosystem. And as part of that, we were doing the monthly event at the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, the premier, most important venue in the entire city of Hong Kong. So we had this incredible room. It's like $30,000 a day if you aren't working with the government to host a function in that room because it's so prestigious and exclusive. And we're doing this monthly startup ecosystem event there, sponsored by Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and others. So, but this is like in cooperation with the government, which is clearly the CCP this is right before the protests happened, the months leading up to the big protests where the CCP really kind of changed the rules in Hong Kong. So, and by the way, that's why we stopped the events, because my sponsors for that event, when I would meet with them privately, at Starbucks, inevitably, when we would talk about the China versus Hong Kong issue, they were Hong Kongers, and they were very pro protests, and that's because of that I was able to get, as all the Swedes in the room will know, the Hong Kong protest organizers came to speak at my event in Stockholm. Now, they would be instantly vaporized if their identities were known. And so we had to conceal their identities when speaking at my event. Just by announcing that they were going to be speakers at my event, I got letters from the Chinese ambassador here in Stockholm, who threatened to contact all of my sponsors, like Ericsson, like Volvo, like Mercedes, MasterCard, Visa, you name it, and threatened to tell them that they must remove themselves as sponsors of my event or risk losing their business in China. Because I had the Hong Kong the Hong Kong protesters, and I didn't. God bless all of my sponsors, including McKinsey, by the way, who was the top sponsor that year, Chris.
Hey, it worked out well for them. They had change of heart afterwards.
Well, it was, but here's what happened. McKinsey, interestingly, all those sponsors I just named, McKinsey was, HTC was as well, which is from Taiwan. That was an interesting minute. But anyway, so all the sponsors started messaging me, hey, we're getting contacted by the Chinese ambassador that, blah, blah, blah. And so McKinsey took down their logo from the stage and anywhere around the stage while the Hong Kong protester was on stage. So during the time that the Hong Kong protesters were a part of the main stage, all of McKinsey's logos, they were the top sponsor of the event, had to be removed from anywhere around the venue so that nobody could take a photo with McKinsey's logo with the Hong Kong protesters in the same frame. So anyway, it was a wild event. So kudos to Paul and his team from the New York Times, who just exposed all of these paid shills who are making some interesting living, being mouthpieces for the CCP.
Who gave them the lead? Was that something they found independently, or did someone from Five Eyes drop them a
It
little hot hint?
It was Lawai 86 cracked this wide open because the CCP accidentally made him an offer to pay him to make videos.
Ah, gotcha. An errant email with the CC line. It's amazing, essentially, that email's been around for, 30, 40 years now, and they haven't quite fixed that little bug that, if you CC the wrong people, you can basically wind up on front page news. You think after 40 years you might have something there.
So then, but by the way, I don't think Paul mentions or credits Lawai 86 or Sea Milk, as he's called, for cracking this open. But he deserves credit for it because you can go to his account and see it 3 weeks ago. Lawai 86 is the YouTube account. Look 3 weeks back. It says exclusive. I just got paid by the offer by the CCP and then he goes into the details of how the other people are part of the email threads and stuff. So anyway,
but I think they approach the foreign influence first as an agency, not directly the
correct.
government.
That's
Yeah,
correct.
and he linked the dots, and the CC mail was accidentally, passed to him by somebody else. Yes.
They accidentally CC'd him on the thread to the other influencers.
Yeah. So in the beginning, they were offered some other kinds of work. So
right.
that's, for example,
First, they asked him to go to Hainan, which is the island.
Hainan for the touring.
Right.
For promotions.
Just to promote tourism, that it's this great place, and Westerners should come to Hainan, and it's a beautiful place, and blah blah blah. And then we have other interesting things that you might want to promote as well. And then it's a great video. You should watch it on his YouTube account. Anyway,
one quick thing, just that'd be kind of interesting as a follow up. So this is a little unusual because we're going to see behind the scenes with the influencers. But honestly, I mean, like Bibi was mentioning, just because just hire an agency and then they hire the influencers, and by the way, you're going to be covering this maybe politically sensitive topic with just a little one layer removed. There is a long history of buying up at Madison Avenue contracts and hiring different firms on retainer for foreign policy influences. Now, there's actually a really weird one. I don't want to go too far off into this, but during World War II, the British actually had a version of this where they basically had a special operations thing working at the Rockefeller building with permission from FDR, but at the time America was very, very non-interventionist. And what they did is they paid for an absolute, like, a huge amount of domestic propaganda to get America into World War II, specifically enter into on Britain's side, which at the time they were strongly leaning towards not intervening, or even if they did on Germany's side. What's really interesting is a lot of the agencies that basically were formed around that time period, a lot of the domestic groups, went on to create things like Gartner and some of the other stuff. It's absolutely an insane history, but like there's a long, this isn't just something that happened just last year, there's a long history on this one, and when you look at it, there's some very fun like learning versions of history that we didn't get taught in school, which is really cool. Anyways, cool stuff.
Okay.
And Tyler, add a story. Actually, many stories happened here. So during the Olympics, Tokyo Olympics, one celebrity hostess here in Taiwan, and she works a lot in China. And she just post a photo on Instagram and said, "Oh, I love our national players," and for that, she was banned and boycotted by the company in China, and she lost like $1 million for those um, company advocate things. So that's why, like the Ericsson and in your event or the McKinsey there, why they rather to put off their advertisement because China did this all the time. So they know they rather get off this trouble in advance, no matter it will happen or not. Okay, I'm Baby. Let's stop.
Okay. So the next article.
Tyler,
Yes.
sorry, Tyler. I know you want to get on to the next one, but I can't help myself. I had to stop the car in the middle of a dark night here in Scotland to say that what Chris was saying was really quite indicative because it happens. And this is exactly what China refers back to. Well, you guys do it. You guys have done it. Why shouldn't we do it like that? But there is a difference. And the difference is what BB was just saying, in that the difference is that they take it to a much more personal level and make victims of all sorts of people and make it very, very violent and no way but our way kind of thing, So it's no wonder that in that human rights summit that President Biden set up the other day, surely one of the biggest points of that was to actually get people to state what their position on human rights is and to maybe create a 2021 definition of what we mean by human rights and how these sort of things, just this kind of diplomacy and undermining, just is not on. So anyway, that was just my thought. Thank you.
Just a really quick thing about whataboutism. It's a very important thing to basically question essentially what the end goal is. If essentially the end goal of a rhetoric is to basically lead to inaction or to not stop further abuses, then it's very accurate to call something whataboutism. Where I basically think that an open criticism that essentially is that because we do not learn our own history, we basically leave ourselves open to these sorts of comparisons, and they work because there has been historical deception. The more that we can basically come to grips with that truth, and the more that we can basically establish a strong framework moving forward, that's how essentially a lot of human rights abuses can be avoided. But yeah, if anybody is interested in links, and I've got all sorts of things in that direction with stuff. So it's a fascinating history, and I strongly applaud people's efforts that basically are going through and basically establishing a strong framework for not just for what's happened in the past, but moving forward what we can do.
We could also work on being better on our own side, but of course that's not to deflect from the issues that whataboutism is intended to deflect from.
So Nike.
Eli, are you talking about self-responsibility?
I'm talking, for instance, about the fact that the first thing that's always raised in whataboutism against the United States is civil rights, and that was going back to the civil rights movement, and here we are still, and Black Lives Matter is still a controversial thing.
Well, Iran just passed a new block against the U.S. for how it treats its black minorities. So there you go. There's. um, Let me find that. That was the headline on over the weekend. Iran, U.S. Black. Where is it? Iran threatens sanctions against U.S. over treatment of Black Americans.
Hey Tyler, one weird thing I need to look in more into this is going to just look on the side with stuff. But one of the things is a lot of businesses are not allowed to basically have business operations in Iran as a part of the sanctions with things. Um, TikTok post basically that covered Life in Iran shared on Reddit is an interesting kind of workaround with that. I'm starting to see more of these sorts of things pop up more often. I'm wondering essentially if this is something that's intentional or it's just something that's just a side effect of some of the recent things. Reddit having been bought out recently by what was it, like 30%, 40% stake by a Chinese group. Was this Tencent? I think one of the other ones.
Iran is passing this sanction against U.S. What about their own internal human rights issues?
So it says Iran threatens sanctions against U.S. over treatment of Black Americans, and an Iranian judicial official said the Islamic Republic is concerned about police brutality against Black people in the United States.
It's good to know
What
that they
about the
care.
women's rights in Iran? Or where is the Judicial Commission about that in Iran?
The Iranian government vowed today to impose sanctions on the United States over racial and policing issues.
The
So no more
irony.
Persian rugs? Is that what
That's
you're
right.
saying, Tyler?
No more Persian. If you were expecting a Persian rug for Christmas, you can forget all about that.
But I ordered
Well, we
mine
want
actually from Persia, not Iran. So
Well, if anything, we want Persian immigration, so I don't think this is a good thing. De-escalating this kind of conflict would be a great idea. Eric Schmidt famously talked about how the folks who come from Iran are some of the smartest and most intelligent people, as their country is still able to keep up or put up an offense to the American influence of sanctions and all these other things, and still they're able to make advances in radar and other technologies. So it's definitely a people who are resilient and very, very hardworking and very smart. So at the end of the day, it's important to distinguish Iran or the Iranian administration from the Iranian people. So let's make sure that was clear.
There's a very large Persian expat community in the Los Angeles area, which affects some very interesting factors when you look at California
AKA
senators or stuff when they say foreign policy parts. Just something just throw out there that it makes it kind of interesting.
AKA Tarantulas.
Yeah.
By the way, for those who don't understand what's going on there, it's Iran trying to make a demonstration of the hypocrisy of America. So that's the whole point of why they do that. So the next one, what do we got here? Oh, we covered Twitter ads captions. Yes, Chris?
Oh, just one quick thing on the hypocrisy America aspect. Something that's actually really interesting perspective wise is if you are looking from a short term perspective, like something like, let's say, 20, 30 years. It's interesting because a lot of people currently alive can actually be genuinely said to be working from a good faith perspective. What is interesting, though, is when you do look at America's foreign policy, let's say from a longer term perspective, 50, 100, 150 years, it is shocking the amount of, I would say, growth, variation, it's the sheer breadth of essentially things that have been actively supported is astounding. And what's interesting is some of this is very much a bad faith interpretation of American history, etc. But there is something to be said for the difference in perspective of time lengths. If essentially your entire party's doctrine is founded on the idea of the century of humiliation, a lot of that comes from studying histories of what was happening worldwide during these same periods of saying, well, if it was our century of humiliation, what was the century happening in other people's cultures? And so there's a really long-standing trend where diplomats will meet in China, and the Chinese diplomats will know history better than anyone else because that's it's a core part of how the party even existing. So once you understand what the real history is, you can modify it and you can do all sorts of crazy propaganda things with it. But the fact that we leave ourselves open to that is something that I think is something that we can rectify, and it makes it a lot easier to find the actual truth of the matter.
Yeah, that's a good point. Communists always know history really well. I think they even kind of satirized that in the movie The Interview with James Franco, where they actually are very knowledgeable. Just look at any of the responses from the North Korean government when they criticized either Obama or even Trump. It's so well written. The language has a flesh-contained level matched only by the Federal Reserve reports. So it's definitely something that we can do better. But if we were to become a little bit more familiar, perhaps we can meet somewhere closer in the middle rather than on the extremes.
Okay. So the next article that I have here is that Nike acquires an NFT collectible studio called RTFTK, which makes, maybe not surprisingly, NFT sneakers. And clearly Nike wants to get into that game where they might eventually make more money selling NFT sneakers than, what do you call it? And by the way, Chris Milk, or sorry, C Milk, aka Lawai86, just messaged me via, what is that? What app are we chatting in there?
Small world.
Yeah, I think it was the Twitter my Twitter account here. Give me 2 seconds here. Maybe he'll even pop into Twitter right now. Hold on 1 second.
The
Wow.
people that make the news popping up inside the news.
Hold on. Let me invite him into this room right now. We Give me 2 seconds here. We're just DMing in Twitter, so hold on.
Good
So
stuff.
yeah, hold on. This would be worth fixing real fast. So we got him there.
Send him the link.
Yep, I just gotta send him the link. Give me 2 seconds here. I need this link right here. Copy link. Yep. And then let me change this over. Hopefully I don't get disconnected. And talking about and New York Times.
I love this silence. We are so quiet.
Okay. Also with 3.5.
So, how was them League of Legends matches? Any good seasons going on? I need like the tech version of like how about them Broncos, or how's the weather?
Okay, so let's hope he jumps in. His Twitter account name is Lawa86 is the Twitter handle, but his Twitter name is C Milk. And so keep your eye out in the Twitter space for that if you could, Cheryl. Did I accidentally delete the room? Let's hope not.
We can hear you.
Okay, good. Okay, so just watch out for Lawa86 jump in the Twitter space because they just invited him. Okay, so the next article that I have, speaking of China, is from the Wall Street Journal that the United Arab Emirates is threatening to pull out of this massive $23 billion deal for a whole bunch of F-35s, which are America's kind of leading military plane. And officials say that the headline even says, that the Gulf partner, the UAE, is complaining about the requirements that would restrict Chinese espionage.
Well, they spent a fortune on the planes. Can you hardly, China essentially will just turn them into essentially a clone within a year or two. It's like, they worked hard on that thing. It's an overpriced thing, but
Right. I guess we're that's a great point. I didn't realize that's what the essence of it, but I think you're exactly right. That we're worried that the UAE would allow China to have this thing on the ground and replicate it. Yeah.
It's worth also pointing out that they already have versions of some of these. I think it was like the J something. I don't remember what the full thing of it was, but there's another point to be made that ITAR restrictions. If you ever look at the history of where they come from, ITAR, International Traffic in Arms Regulation, the whole history of it's really fascinating. But one of the components of it's not just like a NATO, U.S. military exporting, military weapons just for foreign policy's sake. There are very real business interests that basically keep why you're allowed to export certain countries versus others, and part of that actually has some very interesting implications for, like, say, groups like, say, in Australia, where they say, hey, I want to manufacture something. It has vaguely military applications, like, say, I want to make a rocket that goes into space or whatever. One of the things that's very interesting about ITAR, about how it's structured, is if you have a single component in your entire array. Let's say you use like a little bolt to connect to something, but it's got like an explosive separation flange or something, so it can do a second stage or something. But that happens to be from an ITAR regulated manufacturer. The entire assembly and every attached system is then basically classified as being ITAR basically either compliant or in violation. And this has very real teeth for international customs regulation and sanctions enforcement, to the point where if you have a single basically ITAR violation, your entire country can get blackballed. So they normally don't do that. They normally just throw the company under the bus. and they're basically banned from international exports for like decades. And the thing is, they actually do enforce this. So the reason why this is relevant is that when you have something that for advanced technology, it's never the exact final system. Like the F-35 is just like an amalgamation of 1,000 different part suppliers all put into one plane. If you have a single one of those components or those parts of suppliers that you're able to say, oh wait, what if we could do this part and this part? You can basically find substitutions. It's never 100% clone. You have all the different components. No, the last part on here is that if you're trying to basically create advanced industry or you're trying to catch up, like China's trying to do, and they're very quick to doing so, um, you're filling in the gaps of essentially those missing last components, and having access to reference designs, reference implementations allows you to make that final jump. So that's essentially what they're trying to do there, is they're trying to say, you got to make it on your own, China. We're not going to help you or give you like an espionage bonus for that. One final context on this is that kind of this is a lot of this is kind of a moot point, because one of the articles from like a year or two ago found that essentially when they did a government-wide cybersecurity review, they found out that while the government has certain things for the military and federal contractors, to all the groups that are their secondary suppliers for like Lockheed Martin, etc., most of them are just having some of the most weak-ass cybersecurity in existence. And in fact, when they're looking at there, they're like, the Chinese have been here for years. So in some ways, a lot of this is kind of a moot point because they already have all the original CAD schematics, diagrams, and everything. They've just been hot loading it the moment the engineers finish it and upload to their servers. They just get the daily dump with things, and they've had that for years. So this is a lot of it. Some of it's face saving, some of it's actual secrecy, some of it's military, some of it's foreign policy, some of it's just business, and all these kind of conflate together with like the hey, we're not going to buy your jet anymore. UAE would like to split the difference and say quit fighting. We want to trade with both of you, but China and USA are both saying yeah, pick a side. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out.
Right.
I'll mention one thing about
So
that. This is
my
David.
question
I,
is, sorry, David, I just have one question. I covered this IAC conference a couple of weeks ago in my space medicine newsroom, and I was kind of happy about all the deals that were made, especially with UAE bringing in some revenue to US. But now, if they are kind of taking this in stance, what is the alternate they are suggesting, or is there any other market that is providing them with a similar kind of aeroplane, or where are they going to take their business to? Who is offering them an alternate? I would like to know that.
you get into international treaties with that too. So it's not just the U.S; it's also other countries. But I have several business partners. One in particular from the 1990s who went to federal prison for this exact thing, and with medical supplies and other issues with China. You can look up a guy named Tai Kuo, Taikuo, and I was the chairman of a board of a company, and he was the treasurer, and we worked together on several projects starting in 1993, and he went to federal prison around 2004 for this thing. 60 Minutes did a story on him, and in 2007 there was another project we were doing, and I had two FBI agents walk into my office. With asking me a bunch of questions. And I eventually went down to the FBI office and worked with them quite a bit in going over all the details and everything, with not only the people I was working with, but also some others that we cooperated with. But it's something that they don't play around with this stuff. Even things like medical devices have dual use, the component parts. So it's a big deal. And I've seen personal friends of mine spend time in federal prison for this. Thanks.
Some laws don't matter. Some are enforced much more heavily. ITAR is one of the don't mess around kind of things. One other thing to throw out there is that's kind of interesting is the history of the sorts of technologies that are considered to be controlled applications. Some of them actually include things we use every day. GPS end receivers. One of the things is that the same thing that is leading to all these privacy abuses and everything else like that these days. It's built into every phone. It helps us all do navigations and such. One of the core components on there that's in order to manufacture is just because it depends on military positioning satellites originally designed for nuclear weapons targeting. They just happen to have civilian applications for surveying, and then they started to doing consumer maps, etc. But they still have those military applications. So what they did is they downgraded it so it's only going to basically work with essentially very low resolution GPS. It has to do with essentially the timing encodings and such like that. Bill Clinton basically signed a thing into law to actually give civilians access to the high-end version of that, and then there's some other secondary networks that give even higher precision. But the thing that's interesting is that any chip sold, in order to comply with ITAR provisions, had to have an extra circuit in there that if it ever detected, because you can detect GPS speeds, here's where I am now, here's where I was a few minutes ago, or here's 2 seconds ago. If it ever detects that it's flying above a certain velocity, like, say, a few hundred miles per hour, a few thousand, all that type of thing, it will basically instantly shut down as required to self-destruct, because it's like, well, we don't want these GPS, cheap little consumer things being used for ghetto missiles. Which was great. They were able to enforce that for a full decade before China and Russia just said, "Hey, we'll spin up our own GLONASS and other satellite systems." And by the way, we don't have that requirement for our chip manufacturers. So the market is so flooded with GPS compliant chips that don't have that restriction on them that de facto you've got most of the parts to make essentially a long range missile essentially in your backyard right now, which is insane. One more component on there for ITARs that just I found out recently is that 5-axis manufacturing equipment. We're starting to look at this for some of our own manufacturing internally for some of one of the groups I'm working with. And 5-axis machines are like these magic robot machines. If you ever go into SpaceX and you look at their large rocket parts, going off into the horizon or whatever, the manufacturing is like these boxes. And you basically put in a block of metal, and it'll carve out all the components out of metal, and they're absolutely amazing on YouTube. Once you start looking it up, you'll get a bunch of ads for them, which is great. Anyways, reason I bring it up is that machine being able to maintain such an extraordinary amount of precision on such very high tolerance parts out of very very exotic materials and metal casings allows you to create rocket engines. It allows you to create high end like jet parts and such. So up until 2009, that was considered to be an export control technology, and you weren't allowed to export that to anyone in the world. And again, the thing that broke that was, well, the Germans started to spin up their Haas units and stuff, and China started to clone their own designs, and now it's not something that's enforced anymore. But there's a long-standing history of this as basically being used as a technology suppression device that allows you to basically say the military paid for a fortune on this tech, but we don't want the world to have it, and then eventually the world figures it out after, anyways. It typically does introduce a 10 or 15-year delay, which can be military useful. Anyways, that's a really long diversion, but it hopefully provides some context for a sense of the F-35. Oh, one last thing with Aram. You can get other suppliers for jets, but they aren't going to be quite as like advanced and stuff. But there's a real question of if you really need something this advanced. F-35 is very much like one of the most expensive jet flying platforms ever made. It's honestly cheaper to get a bunch of cheap ghetto drones and a pickup truck. And there's a lot of militaries that are really questioning about where applications of some of these assets are. So you're going to see a lot more of these sorts of reassessments happen in the future if you're looking at actual military policy versus just keeping a military alliance happy. Some of these things are just purchased just to make people feel good. And well, yeah, there's a lot of money changing hands. Military applications are separate from the let's maintain strong political ties. And so you're seeing some of that being reassessed in real time.
Hmm. I remember the number for US dollar was, I think, around $78 billion in terms of the deals that were made. So that would be a sad thing to see that revenue leaving. Not completely, totally. I don't know. I have to see what exactly UAE part was, but I'm going to look into it. Thank you.
Okay. Next one I have here is from Katerina that Elon Musk tweets about a new SpaceX program to use carbon dioxide in the atmosphere as rocket fuel.
Yes,
And
that's very good. I read
Called it.
called it. Yes.
the billionaire SpaceX founder says in a separate tweet that the new program will be important for Mars because that's how you're going to have to build fuel to get back from Mars. Yep. So the next one is from PT Yoder that the
It's
cash.
important, Tyler, because that will reduce the carbon dioxide in our atmosphere, good for the environment. Ella can talk about that because carbon sequestration is a huge problem. So Elon's plan to use carbon dioxide for the rocket fuel is amazing.
Calling it
And
now with things, and you can play the replay in the future. If Musk does anything with kelp or seaweed, watch what happens from the groups here in the clubhouse. There's a interesting little thread going on in the
Yeah.
background of that one.
well, and this was predictable, and it's also the same motivation is behind the X Prize, the $100 million X Prize for carbon dioxide removal that he's supporting. And there are other things down the road that you can also predict based on what he would like for Mars and the way it fits with climate here.
Yeah. The next article from PT Yoder is that the Cash App, which is the very cool consumer financial app from Square, now called Block,
They have a
See,
cool website. It's got a little spinning like little thing, and they got some cool jazz music when you like play spin it up. It's a swanky website. It's also really hilarious because there's like it's like one of those old school like starter pages where there's almost no content until you click on the jobs page and they're hiring for 1,200 roles, which is hilarious.
so the Cash App is now allowing users to gift stock and Bitcoin using their US dollar balances. There are already a number of ways to gift cryptocurrencies, but today the Cash App will make doing so simpler with the new feature rolling out for peer-to-peer gifting of dollars to Bitcoins to a friend. So you can give someone Bitcoins even if you don't have any.
Did you say stock as well?
It does say that. It says
Okay.
there are already a number of ways to gift cryptocurrencies, but today Cash App will make doing so simpler with the new feature rolling out to its peer-to-peer payments app. The app, owned by Block, the company formerly known as Square, will now allow users in the US to send Bitcoin as well as traditional stocks as gifts to other US Cash App users. While
Hey,
services
Tyler, if you can give stock, does that mean that you could like do the bank trick that wealthy folk use, where you can take a loan against that stock and then you don't pay taxes on the capital gains thing, and then suddenly the masses now have access to this? So that loophole gets closed real quick if that happens.
the feature builds on prior functionality that Cash App offered that allows users to send Bitcoin to any cash tag on the app for free. What makes this new gifting feature different is that now users can send Bitcoin using their Cash App US dollar balance or debit card, not just their existing Bitcoin balance. That means users don't have to actually own any Bitcoin or stock for that matter on the Cash App mobile app in order to send it as a gift. And as I said,
Oh,
this
there's so many problems with that. I'm sorry.
this was fits nicely into my prediction that they're going to bundle this and try. Jack is clearly focused on trying to make Bitcoin a currency essentially, and I believe he's trying to do so, and is going to leverage his assets like the Cash App and Square and Twitter. And I still think it's all of these articles continue to add more credence to my conspiracy that he's going to connect the Cash App wallet with the Twitter account is in the near future, where they're as soon as they start doing e-commerce and stuff in Twitter, which is right on the horizon. In fact, it's already
Did you have like
started.
But
some like plane
can I
flights with some
can I
Twitter
just comment?
executives for this one, Tyler?
Yeah, I did a Twitter space room with Twitter's CFO Ned about this now about 7 months ago.
There's a lot of problems with the way that they're doing this, and also it's very interesting that he's doing this because the whole so he's like a Bitcoin maximalist, and the whole premise of the Bitcoin maxis is if you don't own, you own your key, if you don't own your keys, you don't own the Bitcoin or whatever it is underneath it. So they are not fans of owning something that represents the profit or loss of an asset. They're only for things that actually represent Bitcoin. But it sounds like what he's doing is basically giving someone else the ability, like it's with transferring Bitcoin that you don't have is a very strange idea, right? So the idea is that's like transferring a stock you don't own. That's a very odd thing because what you're essentially doing is transferring either cash to somebody for them to purchase it, which means they are the ones dealing with the exchange fees, or you are essentially placing an order on an exchange for someone else, which makes you a broker. So I suspect he hasn't actually spoken with any attorneys about this. I'm not surprised. Most of these guys don't. But this is problematic. I mean, this is not something that can be done easily. And also, Cash App is going to now have to make sure that they're tracking recipients and senders, because especially if they're like a broker, because they're going to have to they're going to have to report all of that stuff. And they're also going to have to track basis now for people. Like usually you have a list of transactions. So that means that your sender basically has to supply information on the tax basis for whatever is being transferred to the transferee. So it's a very weird thing, and there's a reason why they require you to be registered in order to do this kind of a thing. So I don't know how well, how long that's going to be able to last, or how useful it's going to be in the long run. The idea of trying to make Bitcoin a currency, and for all you Bitcoin maxis out there, cover your ears because this will hurt. There is no way for it to become a currency. It is not designed to become a currency. It is designed to be an asset. It's a fine asset. I like it as an asset. It is not a currency. You cannot have a purely deflationary asset become a currency, just like you can't have a purely inflationary coin become a currency. I just want this to be clear for people. If you want to own it as an asset, but don't own it thinking that you are going to have more money, more currency. You don't invest in currencies, you invest in assets. So anyway, all of this is just a very irritating thing, because it is just playing into these misconceptions that already permeate this community, that I feel like I fight all the time, trying to make sure that people have proper information that is realistic and actually understand how the regulations play into all this stuff, and how economics play into it. And then this kind of crap happens, and it's very annoying, because it's like more garbage you have to go through. The other thing is Cash App is super expensive. The fees are so high. There are so many cheaper ways to buy Bitcoin if you want to buy it. Even if you want to buy it and gift it to someone else, there's many cheaper ways to do it. Cash App is not the best way to do it. Now I'm done. Thank you.
Okay, the next one I have is from Katerina, that a team develops the world's first optical oscilloscope. A team at UCF has developed the world's first optical oscilloscope, an instrument that is able to measure the electronic field of light. The device converts light oscillations into electrical signals. And Katerina has this one from the iPhone, that there's a new iPhone feature coming in iOS 15.2 in the very near future that will allow you to specify who can access your Apple iCloud information after you die. And I think all the apps are going to start adding that kind of stuff as people, developers lost loved ones during COVID, and then they realized they need to start adding these features to their products. Omicron spreading rapidly in the US. Infections could peak in January, CDC warns. The prevalence of Omicron jumped 7-fold in a single week, according to the CDC. 7 times each week. That's the whole planet in about 10 weeks. so
So,
that goes
so
fast.
this is the doubling time of like under 2 days, which is consistent with what they're seeing in the United Kingdom as well.
Yeah.
Which suggests that the slightly longer doubling time in South Africa is due, in fact, to the very high rate of previous COVID infections there. I've seen estimates from 70 to 90%.
And the next one's from Jason, who joins us on stage, that the Bill Gates atmospheric spray technology to reduce and reflect light back, or more importantly, heat and energy, by spraying something into the air, which is called a strato. This is now being covered by Forbes. We covered this previously, where they wanted to do this in the north of Sweden. The first time we heard of it, like 6 months ago, and now Forbes is reporting about the stratospheric controlled perturbation experiment, launched by Harvard University scientists, hopes to examine the effects of spraying calcium
Carbonate.
carbonate into the atmosphere to reflect energy, solar energy, to reduce.
The conspiracy theorists are going to have a field day with this one. If you
No
thought
shit. Yes.
5G vaccines were a thing.
No doubt.
There are 5G chips in the aerosols.
So it's the stratospheric controlled perturbation experiment, launched by Harvard University scientists, aims to examine the solution by spraying non-toxic calcium carbonate dust into the atmosphere, a sun-reflecting aerosol that may offset the effects of global warming. At this point, maybe it's better that Bill Gates remove his name from this thing, because now you're going to have people going berserk with conspiracy theories. It will take a small step in the early research this June near it. So they're trying it again back in Sweden. They were trying to do it in Sweden last summer. It got shut down, and now they're going to try it again this summer in Sweden. Okay. And
So the thing is that this may not be the best way to do solar radiation management, but we need some kind of solar radiation management as an insurance policy to make sure that we don't go over tipping points and to run away climate change. Because if we did, then what we emit ain't nothing compared to just the natural release of carbon dioxide and methane that will occur at higher temperatures, and civilization would be cooked. Now, the chances of that happening in the next decade or two are probably small, but the scary thing is the chances are unknown. We do not know how big a risk we are running of that, and therefore, the sooner we have some form of solar radiation management as an insurance policy against that, the better. But the added benefit is that at least most approaches to that could also take the edge off of the things that global heating caused, like the extreme weather events, forest fires, and other things. So it's worth doing. The $100 billion price tag for stratospheric aerosol injection, whether it's calcium carbonate or sulfate aerosols or other things, it could be much better spent.
Okay, so I'm looking forward to the Snowpiercer train. Who's with me? Because it's probably going to be either a runaway cooling effect if we don't get the chemistry right in some of these situations. I think that's a potential danger that's kind of been mentioned in science fiction, and we always get warnings from science fiction about these things. So I think the concern is legitimate. I just don't think perhaps the people realize how much precision there is in these efforts with some of these technologies. So I think there's also a lot of trust that can be handed to them, but also in fiction, we've seen that doesn't work out. So I just hope that there's no sort of like eco-terrorism event with these sort of efforts, because one, they are expensive, and two, the people working on site or working on these projects are some of the smartest people that we want trying to address these issues. So, that's also, I think, a warning that comes from a lot of media and fiction.
For stratospheric aerosol, it would have to be a state actor just because of the magnitude of the effort involved. Other things you could debate either way, whether somebody less than a state actor could do it. But the thing is that there are ways of doing solar radiation management that either you have to keep doing and are more modest in scale of effort, or the one that I favor the most, space-based solar radiation management, which would be, an international collaboration, most likely, offers a lot of benefits and could also be well controlled. There would essentially be an instant off switch.
Okay, well, they're kind of related. Thomas Tong found an article that the UN confirms a record Arctic temperature of 100 degrees Fahrenheit. It's a little hot for the Arctic. And BB found one that SoftBank is spreading China's SenseTime facial recognition system in Japan. Maybe they're a big investor, and now they're bringing this is weird. Chinese AI group's biggest outside investor, SoftBank, helps roll out the system at Wendy's hamburgers in Japan.
Yay! So that's not really, really strange, because we always hear about Japan's conflicts with China, especially on trade.
Yep.
So it's interesting that there was no sort of effort from either of the regulatory bodies in those countries preventing this sort of investment, because usually those are the kind of mechanisms that are in place.
Yep. Also from BB, struggling to win subscribers, Netflix cuts its prices in India from $6.60 to $2.60 for a month of Netflix. And the Biden team mulls new clampdown on China's largest chip maker, SMIC. Agencies are meeting Thursday to discuss further restrictions. U.S. equipment makers face new restrictions in selling to SMIC. Told you, I told you, I told you. It's endless. It will continue unabated for the foreseeable future until the entire decoupling. I mean, it's what else can you say? Yeah, Biden wants to inhibit China from making semiconductors with their biggest semiconductor company, SMIC, is dependent on some U.S. technologies, and we're going to shut that stuff off. And Ken's right. They're at some point they're going to retaliate in some interesting kind of way. So I'm going to share that, retweet BB's tweet so you can see that. And then Jason shares one from the New York Post that says Facebook admits the truth. Fact checks are really just Facebook finally admits the truth that fact checks this, that social media used to police what Americans read and watch are just opinion.
Tyler,
Yes.
that was what this is the article I was pointing to in the very beginning that I said it dovetailed in this article about they're just opinions, which is very interesting because it's now contradicting the very first article when you started the news.
So it says, thanks to a lawsuit brought by celebrated journalist John Stossel, who used to be like a really featured journalist on 60 Minutes for many, many years, which has exposed the left's supposed battle against misinformation as a farce. This is a really interesting. Now I know what's going on, and I'm glad to see Cliff has his hand up here to talk. Cliff is a journalist as well. And so John Stossel, for those who don't know, although pretty much any American between the ages of 30 and 50 and 80 do. I mean, he was a feature.
John Stossel.
Yeah, he was every Sunday night was bringing some of the coolest stories we all grew up with. And now he's left 60 Minutes, and now he's independent, and he was on Facebook doing what he's always done, like really interesting stories. And then he got silenced by Facebook. But he was reporting facts as he has. This dude is like a legit journalist, like full on, as legit as he's not really left. He's not really right. He's based on facts. He's based on the principles of journalism. Cliff's got his hand up. Go ahead, Cliff.
Just to circle back to the story about chips, electronic chips.
Okay.
Look, that is a really big concern that I think a lot of the public aren't really grasping, and a lot of our politicians aren't either. And the reason I say that is because, look, there's been a shortage now for about 18 months. It's been an increasing problem to the point that, many vehicles that we use for transportation are either not being built or there's very limited production runs because of it. And if we look, and again, I know I sometimes go after Beijing, and I can't help it, but if we look at Beijing's behavior over the last 12 months in particular, vis-a-vis Taiwan, that should be a warning bell for the Western developed world, because Taiwan supplies about 50% of the world's computer chips. And, if Beijing are going to go in and seize Taiwan, that could pose serious, serious problems to the world's global supply chain when it comes to anything and everything electronics. And so I do think that that's a topic that's worthy of, greater discussion at some point down the road. So I'll place myself on mute here.
Okay, thank you for that. So Stossel posted a pair of videos that touched the third rail of liberal politics, climate change. Neither questioned whether climate change is real, but each talked about other issues, namely forest management and using technology to adapt. Yet the third party that Facebook contracts to review these pieces, Science Feedback, flagged them as false, or our favorite, lacking content. Why? Science Feedback didn't like Stossel's quote-unquote tone. That is, you can't write anything about climate change unless you say it's the worst disaster in the history of humanity, and we might spend trillions to fight it. For this, Facebook bans or minimizes Stossel's reporting, depriving him of readers and revenue. Then, when sued, Facebook throws up its hands and says, not our problem. His real beef is with Science Feedback. You see, we wash our hands of it. As for the fact As for that fact check label we slapped on your piece in Facebook's response to Stossel, it argues, well, that's protected opinion under the First Amendment. Oh, so when you get fact checked on Facebook, as he did for his article, his video piece about climate change and global warming, he got, a warning like anyone else gets that says this is false, and we're, going to hide your content because it's false, it's misleading, it's dangerous content. When he sued them, they basically says, well, it's just opinion. We have the First Amendment right to have an opinion to do that. But he, as a journalist, is very careful not to state things. He follows the principles of journalism. So the Post has faced the same gauntlet too many times. In February 2020, we published a column, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, it's an interesting point about how he knew he was right, so he sued them. Anyway, so the next article from Evan that I'm retweeting is that the Biden administration signed an executive order to allow online passport renewals. Fantastic for that. As someone who has to do that more than I should. And WhatsApp starts a pilot to adopt 500 villages in India for access to digital payments. And there's another I told you so, that WhatsApp is going to become a fintech app, and they're starting in India so they can copy WeChat in China. And there you go. Those are your headlines today. 2 hours and 30 minutes. Thank you again, everybody, for another fun tech news around the world. We will see you next time.